Hi guys, so on to chapter 4 of Florence Nightingale's The Angel of the Crimea. This is called Looking Out. Step by step and all unconsciously, Florence Nightingale had been training her hand and eye to follow the dictates of her keen mind and her loving heart. Now, a grown young woman, she began to think seriously of how she should apply this training. What should she do with her life? Should she go on like her friends in the quiet, pleasant ways of country life? The squire's daughter was busy enough. Every hour of the day was kind of useful, happy, healthy, but would she be content with this? Her heart told her that she was not content. Her friendly visiting among the sick and poor, who had seen much misery and suffering, far more than she and all the other kindly ladies could ever attempt to relieve. She felt that something more was needed, and she began to look around to see what was being done. In the larger world. It was about this time that she met an Elizabeth Fry, a noble and beautiful friend of the prisoner. Mrs. Fry was then an elderly woman, with all the glory of her saintly life shining about her. Florence Nightingale, an earnest and thoughtful girl of perhaps 18 or 20. I don't know what words passed them, but I can almost see them together, a beautiful, stately woman. The slender girl with her quiet face and earnest eyes can almost hear the young voice questioning, eager and ardent, the elder woman answering, grave and sedately, with words of wisdom. The interview was one of the great moments of Florence Nightingale's earlier life. A little later in her life, in 1843, she met another person whose words impressed her deeply. And of this meeting, the author can give us a clearer account. For that person was her own father, that's the author's father, a Dr. Samuel G. Howe. Some 10 years before this, her father had decided to devote his life, the author's father, to helping people who needed help. He had established a school for the blind in Boston, in America. He had brought Laura Bridgman, the blind deaf-mute, out of her loneliness and taught her to read, write, and talk with her fingers, the first time this had ever been done with a person so afflicted. He had laboured to help prisoners and captives in the North and the slaves in the South of America. In short, he was called a philanthropist, that is, one who loves his fellow man and tries to help them. My father and mother were travelling in England soon after their marriage, and they were invited by Mr. and Mrs. Nightingale to spend a few days at Embley Park. One morning, Miss Nightingale, for so I now must call her, for she was a woman, met my father in the garden, and said to him, "Dr. Howe, you have much experience in the world of philanthropy. You are a medical man and a gentleman. Now may I ask you to tell me, upon your word, whether it would be anything unsuitable or unbecoming for a young woman such as myself, if she were to devote herself to works of charity in hospital or elsewhere, as the Catholic sisters do?" My father's reply was, "My dear Miss Florence, it would be unusual, and in England whatsoever is unusual is apt to be thought unsuitable. But I do say, go forward if you have a vocation for that way of life, act upon it, and you will find that there is never anything unbecoming or unladylike in doing your duty for the good of others. Choose your path, go on with it wherever it may lead you, and God be with you." It was in this spirit that Miss Nightingale now began to train herself for her life's work. It's hard for us to understand what nursing was in the early part of the 19th century. To us, a nurse means a trim, polite, cheerful person in spotless clothing who knows just what to do when you are ill, and does it in the pleasantest possible manner. We are glad when they come into the room and sorry when they leave. But this person did not exist in the days of Florence Nightingale, except in the guise of a Catholic sister of charity. Nurses, for the most part, were rude, ignorant women, often cruel, often moody. Sorry, I lost my space. Miss Nightingale spent some months in London hospitals and then visited those in Scotland and Ireland. She was horrified at what she found there: dirt and misery and needless suffering among patients, drunkenness and ignorance and brutality among the nurses. Then she turned to the continent, that's Europe, and found a very different state of things. The hospitals there were clean and cheerful, and the Sisters of Mercy in their white caps and aprons were as good and kind and capable as our trained nurses are today. Up to this time, these good nurse sisters had the only trained nurses in Europe, but in Germany, Miss Nightingale found a Protestant sisterhood, which was working along the same lines and in a more enlightened and modern way. These were the deaconesses of Kaiserswerth, the pupils of a Pastor Fleidner. This good man, one of the best men surely that had ever lived, was the son of a Lutheran minister. That's just a form of church. His father was poor, and Theodore had to work his way through college. But this he did cheerfully, for he loved his work. He studied very hard, but he also gave lessons, sawed wood, blackened boots, and did other odd jobs. When his clothes began to wear out, he sewed up the holes with white thread, all he had, and then inked it over to make it look black. He loved children, and on the long tramp walks he used to take in vacation times, he was always collecting songs and games and teaching them to children. When he was 22 years old, Theodor Fleidner became pastor of a small church at Kaiserswerth on the Rhine, which is a river in Germany. The people were so poor that they could do little either for their church or themselves, so the young pastor set out on foot, to seek aid from other Christian people. He travelled in Germany, Holland, and England, and everywhere people felt his goodness and gave him help. Oh no, where's it gone? Sorry. In London, he met Elizabeth Fry, and the noble work she was doing among the prisoners at Newgate Prison made a great impression on him. He determined to do something to help the prisoners in Germany, especially the poor women. Excuse me, I'm just going to have to take a drink. Who, after being imprisoned for a certain time, were cast upon the world with no possessions, save for a bad name. In his little garden stood an old summer house. With his own hands, the good pastor mended the roof and made the place clean and habitable. He put in a bed, a table, and a chair, and then prayed that God would send to him shelter some poor soul who needed it. One night, a homeless, outcast woman came to the door, and the pastor and his wife helped welcome her in and took her to the clean, pleasant room that was ready. In this humble way, the now famous institution of Kaiserswerth was opened, and other poor women soon found out about this shelter, and in a short time a new larger building was needed, some more helping hands beside those of the pastor and his wife. The good work grew and grew. Some of the poor women had children, and so a school was started. The school must have good teachers, and so a training school for teachers was opened. But most of all, Pastor Fleidner wished to help the condition of the sick. 3 years after the first opening of the summer house shelter in the garden, he founded the Deaconess Hospital. We are told that it was opened practically without patients and without deaconesses. He obtained the use of a part of a deserted factory and begged from his neighbours old furniture and broken crockery, which he mended carefully and put in the big empty rooms. He had only 6 sheets, but there was plenty of water to wash them, and when the first patient, a poor suffering servant maid, came to the door, she was made comfortable in a spotless bed in a clean, though bare, room. I wish I could tell you the whole beautiful story, but it would take too long. By the end of the year, there were 60 patients in the hospital and 7 deaconess nurses to care for them. Today, there is a deaconess hospital or home in almost every town in Germany, and thousands upon thousands of sick and poor people bless the deaconesses, though they may never have heard the name of Pastor Fleidner. Chapter 5, Waiting for the Call. Miss Nightingale spent 2 periods of training at Kaiserswerth. When she left it finally, good Pastor Fleidner laid his hands on her head and gave her his blessing in simple and earnest words, and she carried with her the love and good wishes of all the pious and benevolent community. I wish we had a picture of her in her deaconess costume. The blue cotton gown, white apron and white collar, and white muslin cap tied under the chin with a large bow must have set off her thoughtful beauty very sweetly. She always kept a loving recollection of Kaiserswerth, and said in a letter, "Never have I met with a higher love and a purer devotion than there." On her way home, Miss Nightingale spent some time with the Sisters of St. Vincent de Paul in Paris. Here she saw what was probably the best nursing in the world at the time, and she studied the methods in her usual careful way, not only in the hospitals but in the homes of the poor and suffering, where the good sisters came and went like ministering angels. She still had other opportunities, and this was an unsought one, of learning what they had to teach, for she fell ill herself and was tenderly cared for and restored to health by these women. Returning to England, she spent some time in the quiet of her home, and as her strength returned, she took up her old work of visiting among the sick and the poor of the neighbourhood. But this could not keep her long. It was not that she did not love it and did not love her home, but there were other women that could do the work. She realised this, and realised too that she could do harder work than this, and that there was plenty of hard work waiting to be done. She soon found it. A call came asking her to be superintendent of a home for sick governesses in London, and she accepted it at once. Do you ever think how hard governesses have to work? Do you ever think how tired they must often be, and how their heads must ache, and perhaps their hearts too, when they are trying to teach you the lessons that you have, perhaps again and again and again, and that you are often always not willing to learn? Well, try to remember, those of you who have your lessons in this way, remember that you can make the teaching a pain or a pleasure, just as you choose, and that, after all, the teacher is trying to help you and to give you knowledge that someday you would be very sorry not to have. Governesses are, remember I said right at the start of this, they are nannies, they are they homeschooled children from a household, so they were with that family day in, day out, from morning till bedtime. In the days of which we are speaking, governesses had a much harder time than nowadays. For the one thing, there were not so many different ways in which women could earn their bread. When a girl had to make her own living, she went out as a governess almost as a matter of course, whether she had any love for teaching or not, simply because there was nothing else to do. So the teaching was often mere drudgery. That just means a horrible job. Was not too well done, and that meant discontent and unhappiness, and very likely broken health to follow. The Harley Street Home, as it was then called, was founded to help poor gentlewomen who had lost their health in this kind of life. When Miss Nightingale came to it, things were in a bad condition, owing to the lack of means and good management. The friends of the institution were discouraged. There was no money. Well, there must be money. She went quietly to work, interested her own friends to subscribe, then talked with the discouraged people, restoring their confidence and inducing them to renew their subscriptions. That means putting money into the foundation. And soon, with no fuss or flourish, the money was in hand. So basically, she managed to get people to pay to it. Then she proceeded just as quietly to reorganise the whole institution, engaged competent nurses, arranged the daily life of the inmates. They're just the sick. It isn't obviously a prison. Planned, wrote and worked every day and all day till she had brought order out of the chaos and made the home, instead of a place of disorder and discontent, one of comfort, peace and cheerfulness. You mustn't think that this was light or pleasant work. Sick and nervous and broken down women are not easy to deal with. A hospital, for this is what the home really was, is not an easy thing to organise. It meant, as I have said, hard and annoying work every day, all day, and I dare say, often, when night came, Florence Nightingale lay down to rest more weary than any of her patients. At length her health gave way under the strain. She broke down and was forced to give up the work and go home to Embley for a long rest. It was here, in her own home, amid her own beautiful fields and gardens, that the call came which summoned her to the great work of her life. And we're going to leave it there, and we'll pick it up tomorrow on chapter 6. Bye.